So I wanted to ask you about a bunch of different things that are going on, but first off, I want to just sort of congratulate you because it seems that you have been able to force a lot of different legislatures across the country to grapple with the school choice issue in ways that they have never been able to really do before. Why is that? What is the reason that you've been able to have success with this momentum post pandemic versus all the different movements that have come before that have argued for school choice but not had that kind of legislative reaction?
Well, Ben, you're giving me too much credit. We really need to give the real credit to Randi Weingarten and the teachers unions for overplaying their hand and awakening a sleeping giant, parents who just want more of a say in their kids' education. Look, families who thought that their kids were in great public schools, maybe because they were A-rated by the state, maybe their kids had good scores on their math and reading test scores, started to see another dimension of school quality that's arguably more important, which is whether the school's curriculum aligns with their values. But as far as things that I've done, look, I've changed the language. I think language is really important when it comes to policy debates. And instead of saying school choice, I've really reframed it in terms of funding students as opposed to systems. Funding students, not systems. That puts the other side on defense right away. If you want to argue with me, you're all of a sudden in this weird predicament where you're trying to argue to fund the system or the buildings and not the students. It really shows where their priorities lie. And it allows me to talk about analogies in terms of things like food stamps, where we fund people directly and families can take that money to any private provider that works for them. Same thing with higher education Pell Grants. Same thing with pre-K programs. The money follows the decision of the family. And the left supports all these things when it comes to every other industry and every other level of education, but only when it comes to K-12 education do they get all up in arms about it, and it's all because of the influence of the teachers unions and special interest politics. But things have really changed because for far too long in K-12 education, the only special interest represented the employees, the adults in the system, but now the kids have a union of their own, thankfully, and they're called parents.
Mhm. Talk to me a little bit about what Randi Weingarten has been engaged in over the last several months, essentially trying to sell America a revisionist version of history about what the teachers' unions were doing during the pandemic.
I mean, it's nonstop gaslighting from Randi Weingarten. Most recently, she testified before Congress trying to repeat the lie that they were somehow pushing to reopen schools all the way since April of 2020. It's like, okay, if that was actually true, then why weren't the schools open? Why were your local affiliates tweeting that it was racist and sexist to reopen schools? Why were your board members from the Chicago Teachers Union vacationing in Puerto Rico in person while then saying that they were too scared to go back to work in person? I mean, it was so much nonstop hypocrisy. Nobody's falling for it. Twitter isn't even falling for it either. Randy's been changing her pinned tweet every day for
Yes.
3 days in a row now, trying to say, actually, the Republicans are wrong. I did my very best to reopen the schools. Well, the community notes have been slapped on her tweets 3 days in a row now. Thank goodness for Elon Musk and the fact checkers holding Randi Weingarten accountable. But look, her union lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools. As we saw in the hearing, she had the direct phone number of Rochelle Lewinsky, the CDC director. I mean, the CDC wasn't following the science. They were following the political science. You had Randy's union even threatening safety strikes and also calling Trump's plan to reopen schools callous, reckless, and cruel. I mean, no one's falling for this BS, particularly parents who saw what happened, who had to deal with the struggles for over a year. I mean, and it's largely to do with the influence of the unions. Why were the private schools open? Why were private businesses open? Well, it's because they didn't have the unions making it as difficult as possible to reopen. Private businesses knew that their customers could vote with their feet. If we had school choice, we wouldn't have had this mess with the K through 12 system.
So, talk to me a little bit about the pushback to the degree that there is from critics that don't feel that school choice is necessarily the right answer. And I'm particularly interested because I've noticed this happen online a bit with your own Twitter feed, that there are some critics who are on the right, including like Ann Coulter, asked me at the at the other dinner the other day, sort of why are you so in favor of school choice? And she was sort of saying that like, oh no, this is something that's justified based on like property values and stuff like that. What are the critics on either side kind of really saying against your argument, given that it seems on the face to be such a justifiable point in terms of the ability of people to, have the money follow the student, have them go into the school environment where it makes the most sense, have them be able to make this market-based choice. Is it just kind of an influence based on, kind of a leftist frame of the way that we should view schools? What else is going on here?
I mean, look, the major enemies in the school choice debate are the left. I mean, you don't hear Republican politicians saying that they voted against the school choice bill because of fear-mongering arguments from the right. I mean, you hear them saying, oh, no, I don't want to defund my public schools. You hear them repeating the leftist talking points. It's usually the rhinos who are voting against school choice and joining all the Democrats in doing so. But we are having a lot of victory in most of the red states where we have activity. I mean, in the last 2 years alone, we've had 6 states go all in with Republican trifectas on school choice. But look, the leftist argument is this. It's, this will defund our public schools. And that just really goes to show you where their priorities lie. They are focused on the institutions as opposed to the students. My main response is the money doesn't belong to the government schools. The money doesn't belong to the private schools either, to be clear. The money is meant for educating the child, not for propping up and protecting a particular institution, whether it's public or private. We should fund the student, not the system. And so and we've seen this. We've seen the leftists argue that we got to keep secrets from parents, that parents aren't smart enough to choose their school. It's a total socialist argument that the kids belong to these government institutions. They have it completely backwards. But the main argument you'll hear from the right is a fear-mongering argument where they'll say that, this will lead to government intrusion, or maybe this is not the right policy. Well, first of all, they don't provide
with the money comes increased government observation or something like that over Christian schools and private schools and the like.
We've had private school choice for about over 3 decades now in the country. The burden of proof should be on them making these fear-mongering claims to show me where this has happened. Show me where a private school choice program has ever forced you to take the funding. It hasn't, and that's not going to happen today. If a bill was introduced to do so, I would fight against it if it forced you to take the money. But look, this is the textbook definition of making perfect the enemy of the good. And what we have now is far from perfect. 9 out of 10 kids are stuck in government schools without any exit options. And so we might as well give them the choice to accept the funding or not, to take it to private alternatives. And the government can already regulate private and home education today. And they have over time. Look in 1922 in Oregon. They outlawed private education altogether. And thankfully, 3 years later, the Supreme Court in Pierce versus Society of Sisters struck down that bigoted law, and where the majority of the court famously said that the child is not the mere creature of the state. And was that because of a school choice program? No, it was because they had authoritarians in government that wanted to control other people's kids. You have this in New York City right now. You have socialists from the left coming after the yeshiva schools, the Jewish schools, because they don't get the right test scores or whatever their arguments are. They're not substantially equivalent to the public schools. Well, the families in the yeshivas are saying, well, we don't want to be substantially equivalent to the public schools. And is that because they have a private school choice program? No, it's because they have authoritarians in positions of power. And school choice cuts against the likelihood of government overreach into the private sector in at least 3 ways. 1, you have fewer people in government schools being indoctrinated to like big government policies, who will probably vote to regulate private and home education without an exit option. 2, school choice allows you to have more people exercising private and home education, which means a bigger tent, a broader coalition to push back against any calls for future regulations. And then 3, if more people are using private and home education, the concept becomes more mainstream. It's not some icky thing that a few people are doing in the corner. So the rest of society should be less likely to call for regulation of private and home education if you have school choice. And look, I mean, Randi Weingarten has repeated this fear-mongering argument. Is it because she's a small, limited government, free marketeer? No, she's a big government socialist. She just repeats this talking point because she knows if it gains traction, she'll be able to keep her gravy train going in blue states and in red states. So she's just repeating this argument. If you're on Randi Weingarten's side and not my side, you're probably on the wrong side.
Yeah, I'm 100% there with you, Corey.